and all his statutes. I will put none of the diseases of you on you, which I have brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Then in Deuteronomy, we learn the benefits of when they followed that pattern, that their garments did not wear out, nor did their feet swell those 40 years. Pretty good. You might get tired of the simple same garment, but and then in Psalms it says, and there was none feeble among their tribes. What a testimony for the bringing the in practicing the teachings that God had given them in the scriptures, that we have in the scriptures. Now, as I'm having a little trouble getting it to move when I want it to. All right. There we are. Now, what I wanted to illustrate by this slide is in the early days of the Christian church, after Christ had returned to heaven, there were physicians and there was some advancement in the knowledge of health and healing. It was in a rational approach, but that was lost with some time. And the period of the Christian period, the paganism began to come in and the church began to make some changes and lose their way. And there was also a change in health and healing practices that happened in the health of people. And there came a time that during the Dark Ages in Europe, medicine changed toward the irrational and the mystical. Under the dominant church, actually, as we show here at the next slide, they completely outlawed the practice of medicine. And the doctors that wanted to practice went east. They went on to Arabia and on further east, present-day Iran, in ancient Babylon, and there they practiced a reasonable approach. But in the Western Europe, where the church was dominant, the practice of medicine sort of disappeared. And that's where the practice of exorcism became prominent, because they were saying everything was a cause of a spirit. And so exorcism was the way to go. And this continued till the time of the Renaissance, when we begin to have an enlightenment spiritually, as well as the physical knowledge of the well-being of man begin to come back into use. We need another slide here. There, it doesn't come quickly. So in the mid-19th century, there was no knowledge. That would be in the 1850s and thereabout. When our church was starting, there was no knowledge about chemistry, nor of the physics or physiology. And so the knowledge of how to gain more information, the scientific approach had not been developed yet. And so whoever had a strong opinion, his method seemed to work out. In fact, the attitude of medicine at that time was a continuation of a doctor called Galen. That was back in the 3rd century, 2nd and 3rd centuries. His mindset of what was the cause of the disease and how to deal with it permeated medicine for 15+ years. And it was wrong. And so the approach, when they misunderstood the cause of disease, the approach was totally different than what should be. And this is the status we find ourselves in the early phase of the church, in the early part of last century. And then when it came up into the later 1800s, knowledge began to increase. Doctors gathered together. They began to learn how to formally investigate, so that it eliminated opinions and dealt more with what we call science, and that is continuing today. At that time, there was some strange ways of dealing with sickness. Water restriction was given. If you had a high fever, you were not allowed water. You were put in a dark hot room and all fluids restricted. In fact, there may be given a lot of substance to you that caused you to lose fluid. A totally wrong approach. But because of the concept of what caused disease being wrong, they said there was four humors, which means fluids in the body that were out of balance. They were trying to balance that particular set of fluids. And they also had a lot of toxic substances. You notice up here it says they had mercury, arsenic, antimony, nicotine, strychnine, opium, digitalis, and many other things that would be given trying to alter the fluids of the body rather than putting a lot of fluid back in and cooling the individual if they had a high fever, and a variety of other approaches for other types of disorders. You can see that it was a totally irrational approach, but it all came because of one outstanding physician that his mindset permeated for 1,500 years the wrong way. They did not know about germs. It was about in the 1860s before the bacteria were identified. And so the cause of disease was not understood as far as infectious disease, the conditions of living, and the filth that goes along with some of that type of living was not recognized to allow disease to spread and be the carrier. Nutrition was not understood at all, and to preserve your food during the period of time, they would be salting the food, pickling it, sauerkraut, the pickles, a variety of ways that were not really healthful. And you didn't have the big variety of food through the winter like we do. You can understand the difficulties people had of having good, wholesome food year round. And this all contributed to a lack of good health. And salt, heavy amount, and some of the ways of preservation, as we mentioned, were not healthful. Frequent use of tobacco and coffee and tea. And the frequent drinking of coffee and tea that was used as medicine, actually. And all of these things, putting them together, did not allow for longevity. Coffee was very, very common, and tea with almost everybody. How about working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day? That doesn't produce health either. So I'm simply showing you some of these habits that brought problems. And this one illustrates the refining of flour. It was a status symbol at a certain period of time to have white flour. They had to grind it, and then they put it through silk sieves that let the finest part come down and took out the bran and the fiber and most of the nutrients. And so they loved to have that, and only the rich could do it because it was expensive. Then in the 1800s, it became cheap because of learning to do it through the automatic mills, running it through iron rollers. They could do it cheap and everybody could have it. So nobody wanted the old whole wheat. They wanted the white flour. It's still so today. And in the Orient, the Orientals took the coating off of the rice. They polished the rice and it was nice and white, took the minerals and so forth off, and they had the disease called beriberi, which was death-dealing. But today, even with this knowledge, they won't use the whole grain. I've been over there and practiced there in Vietnam and in Thailand and try and get them to use the whole grain. Very important things because it's critical, those nutrients that were in there. And so medical treatment was usually not so good, worthless. It might even be deadly, the treatment itself. And that you well know about of the past. And with that type of thing, made it easy for a lot of alternative therapies to come in. People bring in, and if they stop doing what the medical profession are doing, no matter what they did, seemed like they got better. So then the credit would be given to whatever system they came up with, And some of those systems carried on. One was homeopathy that carried on for 200 years, but itself did nothing. But it basically gave a decent lifestyle, which was useful. But the particular therapy they used, the homeopathy therapy, was of no value. And we'll get into more of that later on. Here we have the accidental discovery of water used for illness. If we go to the 1700s, typhus was rampant on the ships. As they would go at sea, they would get deficient in their nutrition, and so their immune system didn't work as well, and typhus would begin to take over. And it was a practice to take the typhus patients, put them down in the hold of a ship, dark, damp, and if they're in the tropics, it would be hot. If they were further north, it might be cold, and they would not give them water, and they would die there. One time, a ship in 1877 had so many dying and sick that the hold was filled with the sailors, and the ones that were worst begged to have water. They brought them up on deck, and they says, well, they're going to die anyhow. Go ahead and douse them with the water from the sea. Well, those particular ones survived. And this then was a little clue that this was an improper way to approach sickness. But it didn't seem to be picked up. It wasn't in vogue with the rest of the ship doctors in the world. You get a certain idea and it sticks. And it's so hard to, even if it's wrong, to get rid of it. And this is what was happening on this situation. And so it carried on for some period of time. But over in Austria, there was a young man by the name of Vincent Pretznitz. And he found, he was just as a lad, he had some injuries, and he found that putting cold water on them gave some relief. And he continued to practice this and invent, and eventually he developed spas where people came, and he taught water therapy. And that's eventually in the early 1880s came to this country. But he was famous over in that area. At 13 years of age, he initiated hydrotherapy, which was fine. Now, so some of these alternatives were not bad. They were okay and added to our knowledge and benefits. So the water treatments for home use, you know about those, and we recommend them. When I took medical school training, I started in 1955, and we had a course, we had 100 and some hours of, we called it water. Just nicknamed the course was hydrotherapy. And we learned the old-fashioned ways, the ones they did in the hospitals and sanitariums back in the 1800s. And we enjoyed it. All of the students enjoyed in on this. Eventually, those kind of dropped away. But that was a fun course, and we had real belief in those therapies. Oh, we then began to learn also that having whole grain bread was a very valuable thing. It had the B vitamins and a variety of minerals and so forth. And it was very important for mental health, for the general health at large, but even for the mind diseases, it was important because the B vitamins, in absence, you would develop some psychosis and other problems. Now, there was a group of people, a large group across the country, and looking for the coming of Jesus in 1844. When he did not come, there was a small group that gathered together to study what was wrong. They believed this Bible. They seemed to be correct in their timing, but what was wrong? They didn't quite understand, and they began to study intensely. And over the next 19 years, this group continued to study before the Seventh-day Adventist Church was formed in 1863. And so this group here, but what was interesting, as they began to study the Bible doctrines, a young lady among them was given a message from God. 1848, the first message on health. And the message at this point was not to use tobacco, coffee, and tea. Also, this the messages that come later continue to add to this, but the first message was in 1848. The second message that enlarged upon this knowledge was 15 years, it was on do not, I'm sorry, I was looking for another slide, so I had to back up here. I'll see if I have it. No, yes. All right, I got it. The slide's a little bit misplaced. The second health message came in 1854. So 6 years later, the second one. And it was on not to use refined products, to have cleanliness of home and of surroundings. Now let's back up a little bit here, because I don't want to miss this. At this time that God was giving these messages, he also sent a message to not deal with the swine. There were some people that were reading the Bible and it says the swine is not to be consumed, not to be a part of the diet. And they were teaching it, but God sent a message, leave that alone, I'll bring it in time. This is not the time to bring that in. They had to build upon where they were. And what I had shown in this slide is that the subject of tobacco that was given first in 1848, it was actually 15 years before this group of people. By that time, it was about 3,500 before tobacco was basically out of the use of the members. God was patient. He had a group of people give the wrong thing too much and you split the crowd. And so wisdom from God was used in proceeding. Now I'm going to skip over those slides again and come on. So the cleanliness of home on the second vision, cleanliness of home and surroundings was extremely important, as well as the personage. They were to avoid the use of grease. Grease then was the animal fat, primarily lard. And so today the doctor tells you don't use the animal fat because of coronary heart disease and vessel disease. Way back there, second vision had the answer on there. The other one here, we look at this coarse grains, and that by the coarse grains we feel this probably meant the refining, not to use the refined, use the that which had all of the nutrients still in them. So those things were the second message given. Now we want to go into something additional. I saw that God was purifying unto himself a peculiar people in whom he can delight. He will have a clean and holy people. I saw that God would not acknowledge an untidy, unclean person as a Christian. Well, that's quite a comment. And so today we see cleanliness. We live in cleanliness, but that was a day that you didn't, if you took a bath, you had to get the tub out, the horse tub out, and you had to pump the well and or drop the bucket down in the well, bring it up and heat it all. It was quite an ordeal. Today you hop in and out. It's kind of like washing your face. But think of the conditions where at the time this information was given, that it was, so people didn't always choose to be clean. Our souls, bodies, and spirits are to be presented blameless by Jesus to the Father. And unless we are clean in person and pure, we cannot be presented blameless to the Father. You don't often think about those things being so important to God, but they are. And this is the message is given to the early phase of our church. Then the General Conference put together in 1863, 3,500 members, 21 delegates. And about 2 weeks after that, in this house nearby, the first large vision relevant to health was given in 1863. The first one, 1848. The second one, 1854. The third one here in 1863. Thereafter, there were many, many additional messages on health and healing, but the great long one that really opened up the subject to the church at large was given in this house where they were having worship one day, 2 weeks after the arrangement of the general conference. And so we have this resembling that. And in that particular message at this time, the important point was that the message of 1863 emphasizes that our lifestyle affects our eternal destiny. It's rather important. Some take it more serious than others. Fortunately, most take it seriously. But it affects our way of thinking, having a healthy body, having free of these disorders. We then are more likely to choose the merits of the shed blood of Jesus Christ for salvation rather than our own works. But it also had to do, even some mental diseases came about when they were improperly nourished. I was again shown that our health reform is one branch of the great work, which is to fit a people for the coming of the Lord. It is as closely connected with the third angel's message as the hand is with the body. Extremely important. Again, our purpose tonight is to show the benefits and what God himself gave a message as to how for us to live. And the benefits that came from this, the science now recognizes, in contrast to the counterfeit that we want to expose in later presentations. This is my object of dealing, because many of you may come and say, well, I didn't know this was going to be a health lecture. I thought we were going to be exposing spiritualism and health and healing. That is our objective, but I think it's more important that we really have that firm conviction that God himself blessed us with a way of life. If we have that and we understand his way, it's a little easier to pick out the faults when it comes along. Yeah. But it's the faults has moved into our church in big ways because it comes in so deceptively in ways that many people think this is a more beneficial way. All right. And I have quite a few little quotations here that pertain to what we're presenting. He, God, designs that it is the great subject of health reform shall agitate the public mind deeply and stir to investigate, for it is it's hard to read for me here. It is impossible for the men and women with all their sinful, health-destroying, brain-innervating habits. Remember I mentioned what we eat can affect how we think. And interesting, today they're finding that the bran that's in the grain is the food that the bacteria in the colon need to produce the chemicals that affect our brain. Wow, it's fantastic that God gave this information in it for ages here. The scientific community says it's not important, but God way back there gave us that information. I want you to have confidence that what God gave this people in health reform, in the understanding, is so valuable that we should not even consider the counterfeit. That's what I want to see happen. All right, we continue on. For it is impossible for men and women with all their sinful, health-destroying, brain-enerving habits to discern sacred truth through which they are to be sanctified, refined, and made fit for the society of heavenly angels in the kingdom of glory. All right, so we have a church that started in 1863. By 1866, there was a health reform institute started. This was they purchased a house and people came there for the wellness. It was a wellness center, the first one in the church history. And they initiated also a circulation of a journal that was teaching health habits. That actually is the beginning of the first public health effort in the United States. So we look at the next. Waiting, there we go. This is the picture of the first health institution in our church. What amazes me, if you see up there on the roof of that porch, a lady is sitting out there with a child in her arms. But what was, what a hospital. The building on the backside is what they built for the hydrotherapy. And so what's their treatment? People come and stay here. They exercise, they walk, they take the hydrotherapy, and they have a healthful nutritional diet. And that's the therapy that is used for this beginning. And there were so many sick people of our own church members then that actually one time the conference couldn't even meet because they were all sick. And so there was need for, at that time, of even the young people. Tuberculosis was a rage at that time. There we go. I know you can't read that. It's a little hard, so because of the size. When I originally put these together years ago, we did the projection always on a big, large screen. And now we've come down to the little ones, and it gives me a bad time. And I don't see as well as I used to either. The way in which the way in which Christ worked was to preach the word and to relieve suffering by miraculous works of healing. But I am instructed that we cannot now work in that way, for Satan will exercise his power by working miracles. God's servants today could not work by means of miracles because spurious works of healing claiming to be divine will be manifest, will be wrought. For this reason, the Lord has marked out a way to which his people are to carry forward a work of physical healing. Combined with the teaching of the word, sanitariums are to be established. So that in the early days, we had many, many sanitariums. Early graduates of the school, medical school, went out and started that. Angels will attend patients, helpers, and physicians to assist in the work of restoration, so that in the end, the glory will be given to God and not to the feeble, short-sighted men. So this was the method that God instituted, but he gave the instructions are very simple. Health Institute was to be an education center, and the physicians were to have the highest training possible. No novices were to be connected with the health reform work. So education was important. They were to be able to explain their methods to the doctors of the day that made sense, scientific sense. Progress. So in 1866, now we got the 1863, and now we're up to 1866. We had the institute started, and the publication of a health journal was instituted and was sent out to the people. The Western Health Reform Institute established this, and from there, this paper was sent out. The therapy at the institute was what? Exercise, hydrotherapy, vegetarian diet, whole grains, nuts, no alcohol, tobacco, coffee, or tea. Rather simple, very simple. But with God's blessings, magic things happened in the restoring of health. So we're now moving down through time. In 1866, the Battle Creek Sanitarium started. The School of Health opened. That was the first public health school in the United States. 1883, the School of Nursing opened. They needed Christian nurses. And so to have them, they had to open their own school. And then in 1895, as it progressed and the establishment became well-founded, they became interested in more doctors, and they had to open their own medical school. So that was called the American Medical College. That started in 1895. And so Coming up to 1901 now, as we progress through this history, the medical and surgical sanitariums opened across America. In the Northwest, we had a lot of them. Oh, there's only a couple left, but there was a lot of them in the Northwest part of the United States in their day. Every doctor could go out, and it didn't take much legally to start one. And the treatment was therapy, was simply, and they added surgery to their hospitals. And that was made it easy. Now it's a very difficult, even if you have one established, it's difficult to make it financially feasible. 1901, medical and surgical sanitariums opened in many nations. So as the doctors went to other countries, that was easy to do that too. Nursing schools were developed in many of these faculties. It was interesting, I was in the middle of Russia at a church presenting this very story, and it was in Russian. And I told them that we had, at that time that I counted, we'd had, I think, about 54 nursing schools around the world. And I remember they're pleading to me, can our students go to those? Can our young people go to those schools? And I said, yes. And I suggested a number of them that were not in the United States, where economically it would be far easier to go to. When I was in Vietnam and at Saigon, we had a nursing school. On there, we had a hospital and a nursing school. In Thailand, I was there, same. And so across the world, God's message was being propagated by these various institutions and schools. Now we come to the leading doctor, Dr. John Kellogg, which all of you have heard of his name and are familiar with. That became the leading doctor in Battle Creek Sanitarium. The whites actually financed a lot of his education in the medical training to help him. He was a bright young man and proceeded, and he went to leading institutions and came out of well-trained physician for that time. And he became director of the Battle Creek Sanitarium. And this, I'm sure you're not able to read, and I will read it from here if you'll allow me. My dear brother, as I have before written to you, I know that the Lord has placed you in a very responsible position, standing as you do as the greatest physician in our world. Wow, that would be tough to take, wouldn't it, to hear that and not have your buttons pop. You're the greatest physician in the world, a man to whom the Lord has given understanding and knowledge, that you may do justice and reveal the true missionary spirit in the institution, which is to represent truth in contrast with error. And our whole little seminar that we'll be dealing with tonight, tomorrow, is to show God's method versus the method with the errors in them that have come in so lately.
We have a reader.
That would be fine. That would be good. Sure. We're going to have somebody read that can be closer by for me there. That's I had about 7-8 months ago a big turn in vision. It was not too good to begin with, and then it turned downward. It's come back quite a bit. I'm receiving injections in the eye, but I struggle a bit, and so we'll improve this in a bit here. Thank you. All right. Now, as we go on about Dr. Kellogg, as you looked to God in your critical operations, angels of God were standing by your side, and their hands were seen as your hands performing the work with an accuracy that made beholders surprised. This man was blessed of God. There. All right, I'm sorry. It was slow to respond. There we go. Who has been by your side as you have performed these critical operations? Okay, I'm going to let you carry on and read from there. Start at the beginning and go through there. Thank you. Yeah.
Who has been by your side? Who has been by your side as you have performed these critical operations? Who has kept you calm and self-possessed in the crises, giving you quick and sharp discernment, clear eyesight, steady nerves, and skillful precision? The Lord Jesus has sent his angels to your side to tell you what to do. A hand has been laid upon your hand. Jesus, and not you, has guided the movements of your instruments.
Wow. So God is blessing this man and giving him strength and ability, and the angels are helping. And the institution grew. It had problems, as any institution does, but as time went along, here we have a picture of a Battle Creek in its zenith day, 1,000 beds. And it was an institution where the wealthy of the nation and of other countries would come to as a sanitarium. They would stay there for days, weeks, and they had surgery. It was a looked at place if you had illness to go to. The rich and the famous came there. Now, Dr. Kellogg, will not go back there, he instituted a variety of healthful foods, and the breakfast cereal, you're well aware of Kellogg's breakfast company. And he also instituted the soybeans, but one of the graduates there, Dr. Harry Miller, really made them more famous when he went to China and he developed soy milk to save the children. Their mother's breast was not producing milk and the babies were dying, many of them. And so he developed a milk to save these babies. And today, worldwide, you can find soy milk. And this is the pattern and where this originated and came from. On that part, I thought you'd find that interesting. Sometimes it works for me. There we go. But some storm clouds came on. He was famous. He was great influence upon all the rest of the doctors at the sanitarium, and even had great influence with the leadership of the General Conference. But he got connected with some teachings that weren't quite correct, and he accepted them. He accepted the teachings that God in his creation left a piece of his divinity within each creation, every object, every person. And he, over many years, was propagating this philosophy, and the General Conference people didn't know quite how to deal with it. They didn't quite accept it, and yet they didn't know really what it was. And it wasn't until they received a letter from Ellen White outlining what it was that they begin to understand. And so I'm going to have you read this, please, nice and loud.
Subtle Teachings, 1899 General Conference Session. Ellen White in Australia was given Envision warnings, which were sent to the General Conference meetings in USA about the deceptive teachings of Dr. Kellogg. These were pantheistic concepts of the nature and personality of Christ. This theory was that God was in all substances, air, water, food, etc. Righteousness came by faith, that God was in such, and we receive righteousness by partaking of.
So today, the same teaching is widespread through the Christian world, that God left a piece of divinity in all of his creation. But on the Eastern view, where we use the word pantheism, they say there's no God. There is a force, there is a power, a cosmic spirit that was the creative power, and that is in you, and they call it God. So they have from the Eastern viewpoint, they have a God that is in you, flowing through. And now in the Christian side, the concept that you have some divinity left, you basically have the same teaching, and you have your divine within. This is rampant today, and it's the power behind the counterfeit that we're going to be seeing more about as we go forward. The counterfeit has to do with God inside, divinity within. So let's proceed. Now, this one, read, and this is what Dr. wrote in the General Conference Bulletin. It was in 1997. In the General Conference Bulletin, he put this belief that we're talking about in there, so we better understand what he's saying. Please read.
Pantheism. I see it says pantheism.
All right. The word pantheism is where the divinity, there is a living God, and he left a piece of himself in it. Pantheism, where there is no God, there's just a cosmic spirit that is considered that. So it's another word. At the time of Ellen White, she says it is akin to pantheism. They didn't have that word. It's come up in the meantime. Thank you for bringing that out.
Pantheism. We have here the evidence of a universal presence, an intelligent presence, of an all-wise presence, an all-powerful presence, a presence by the aid of which every atom of the universe is kept in touch with every other atom. This force that holds all things together, that is everywhere present, that thrills throughout the whole universe, that acts instantaneously through boundless space, can be nothing else than God himself. What a wonderful thought that this same God is in us and in everything.
So this came out in the General Conference, but they're having difficulties at this point. And about this point, the church and the medical institution separate. The whole institution is lost. It was not in the name of the conference, and the whole institution was lost. At the same time, things begin to start up down in Southern California. The false theory that God is an essence. So read this also. This is a response now found in book Education, Evangelism, page 601. Please read.
Already there are coming in among our people spiritualistic teachings that will undermine the faith of those who give heed to them. The theory that God is an essence pervading all nature is one of Satan's most subtle devices. It misrepresents God and is a dishonor to his greatness and majesty.
All right. The idea that I have divinity within, if so, I just need to build it up. I don't need a savior. And this was what the danger of this teaching was. And it was moving into the church. Actually, it took out some major leading members of the church, of the leadership, as they separated. The church, we had a fire that destroyed the sanitarium, 1902. And then it was to be rebuilt. The doctor wanted to rebuild it. He wanted a big 1,000-bed institution. And instructions came, no, we should have a small institution, and many of them around the country. But he went out and went ahead and wound up building a 1,000-bed institution. The architect he got is the one that was the architect for the Library of Congress, and they had more than an acre of marble flooring in this institution. It really went expensive. It was luxurious, but against the advice of the Lord. He proposed to write a book on health to sell so that he had money to build this. And so we want to look at what about that book. He called it The Living Temple. And in this book, he put these sentiments, he put these teachings all the way through it about God being within. And that was a problem. He was going to have it printed by the church press, but they chose not to, and that press burned down, so they could not. He had it published elsewhere. And this one now, can you read that? I can't from here.
Yes, sir. The Living Temple, a book that was written under the inspiration of the arch-deceiver. The sentiments advocated in Living Temple make this book a dangerous production, for in the book is taught an insinuating, deceptive science of satanic origin.
Yes. And we're told, she tells us that if you continue to dwell upon that subject, it won't be long before the devil can talk directly to you. So this is giving you a glimpse into the foundation principles upon which we're looking at this counterfeit that we're going to be exposing a bit. This is the basic principles between the two. God's method and God's teaching of salvation through faith in the merits of the shed blood of Christ versus the other one that says you already are Christ. You just need to bring it up in the fullness of Godhood. And the medical therapies are based upon that concept. The Living Temple, this book's theme was akin to pantheistic concepts. The church publishing house refused to publish, but he had it published elsewhere. Please read.
Changing the personality of God. The enemy of our souls is earnestly at work to introduce among the Lord's people pleasing speculation and incorrect views regarding the personality of God. The sentiments regarding the personality of God, as found in the book Living Temple, are opposed to the truths revealed in the Word of God.
Go ahead.
We need not the mysticism that is in this book, The Living Temple. Those who entertain these sophistries will soon find themselves in a position where the enemy can talk with them and lead them away from God.
So this was some serious days back there in the 1890s. And there we are. So I'll read this one. In the book, The Living Temple, there is presented the alpha of deadly heresies. You've heard this before? The alpha of deadly heresy. The omega will follow and will be received by those who are not willing to heed the warning God has given them. And you might ask, are we going to be talking about the omega? I'll leave that up for you to decide. But what we're talking about when we start exposing the counterfeit, it's the basic principles that are involved here that's being exposed. Those principles are found in the counterfeit. I personally believe that certainly this counterfeit alternative therapies, at least is a part of the omega. I'll leave it up to you to make your own decision on that part. But to me, it's that serious. Go ahead, read.
Be not deceived. Many will depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. We have now before us the alpha of this danger. The omega will be of a most startling nature. All
right. So we have this counsel from the Lord through his messenger about these practices. And going back a bit, when the General Conference was dealing in the early 1890s with this subject, it came up and it was a critical issue. She was in Australia, and she, through a vision, was shown what was happening. She wrote a letter, and as they were meeting, trying to understand and to make decisions, they received that letter during the session and were able to make the choices of severing themselves from this teaching. She had also been given a dream, and that dream was she was on a ship, and this ship was in the North Atlantic in the fog, iceberg country, and the lookout on the front yelled back, "Iceberg ahead." And in the dream, the command was full speed ahead. And they hit the iceberg. The ship shuddered tremendously. The iceberg split apart. The ship sailed on through. This was dream, telling what to do under this situation. The church was to hit it straight on. And they did. And they sailed through to continue on that part. Why do I go into these? Why don't we just start exposing, dealing directly? Again, I want to emphasize the stronger confidence we have in what God has given and shared with us, the little harder it's going to be for us to be deceived. And to review these things that some of you may never have heard some of this, and those who do, to refresh it is valuable. It has helped me, and I'm sure you'll find it of value. All right, so we go on. What's happened here? In 1,000-bed hospital built. In 1901, the Battle Creek College moved to Bering Springs. In 1903, the General Conference and the publishing department moved here to Washington, D.C. Battle Creek, the concentration of Adventists in Battle Creek moved out, and it was beneficial for the long term for the church. Separation. Dr. Kellogg continued teaching his pantheism. The division occurred, and the final separation in 1906. The medical institution chose to go its way, and actually the last doctor to graduate from their medical school was 1910. The blessings were withdrawn, and at this same time, things were happening over in Loma Linda. We'll look at some of that happening. So the Southern California Conference was a small conference, about 1,100 people. And they had just recently purchased 2 institutions to form a sanitarium on each one, on their Paradise Valley and Glendale. And they were told to stay out of debt. Then along comes this little lady that says, there's another one. These are not the ones that God, he wants these, but he wants another one, and these aren't it. You need to have, and they says, we can't do it. We're overwhelmed already. And it's a miracle story as how Loma Linda was purchased for $40,000. It was what's happened at this time in the Southern California. The top one was Paradise, and the bottom one is Glendale Sanitarium. They had had a great boom of visitors from the east for a period of time, and then a big depression came on, and all of that visitation and travel for Southern California stopped, and these institutions went broke. And so they were up for sale for a dime on the dollar. And so that's why they had just purchased those, and now this little lady saying, there's another one out there you need to get. And so there was another way of solving that problem. In 1901, she saw this envision that a great educational center should be established. And then in 1905, Elder Burden found this place called Loma Linda. It was a sanitarium on top of a hill. It was actually a resort in 600 acres. It's railroad running through it right to Los Angeles, a deep well of abundance of water, and 64 rooms. A big place broke. Eventually got it for $40,000. And this became the beginning of Loma Linda. We'll take a view on the other side of the building, and that was on a hill. Loma Linda means a pretty hill. And you can see the other side, quite an establishment, right? I, for 2 years, took my meals in this establishment, my first 2 years of medical school. It's not there now. It became a fire hazard, older, but it was rather impressive. What a buy. And at that time, to get the legal certification to do the teachings, they made a university out of it, and therefore they could go on later with the dental school and the other schools by getting the right credentials early on. Now, this school, 1905, the nursing school started, but it was 1909 before the medical school started. And the training was told to be of the highest order, students to have the privilege of maintaining a living connection with the wisest of all physicians, from whom there is communicated knowledge of a superior order. I felt it was a tremendous privilege to be able to be a student there. The first nursing class and the first baby. And the time after it was purchased, she had seen this place in vision. And when she came out and saw it, she says, yes, this is the place I saw in vision that was to be. And she's giving an ordination talk here. The medical students are doing, excuse me, some hydrotherapy early on. On there, the water treatment. They're going out to do missionary work on Sabbath in the classroom, looking at the microscopes. To all the world, so the graduates graduated, and now they went to the world as well as all across the United States. And mission hospitals were established worldwide, nursing schools, schools for all medical ancillary services, and dietitian school training of specialties. So it spread rapidly, and the value. The dental school started the year before, 2 years before I started my training. I started in 55. I said 51 before it's 55. And the School of Dentistry was well established by that time. And at this time, we now have, I think it's 7 medical schools around the world. Breakfast cereals were a result. Peanut butter was not invented, but it was made popular by Dr. Kellogg. And soy milk we talked about, the meat substitutes started on those. So it was also the beginning of these healthful practices and the worldwide influence, the hospital administrators to China. When there was a man that was in China, one of our members, and he had connection with the high-ups of the medical institutions over there, and he arranged for the administrators of our hospitals to go to China and conduct courses on administration. I did a trip to China with this man myself, and he told me what connection he had with this. And the Chinese, at the group I was with, we had a doctor from Loma Linda that had made friends with the high up in the medical institutions in China. He had helped establish stop smoking campuses in their medical schools, many of them, Dr. Gimbel. And he was wined and dined by the highest levels of their medical society, the government on there. And they've supplied us with hotel rooms and so forth. It was very interesting. This is just in, I think about 2005 is when I traveled there with him, but he continued after that some time. Right. Now, the worldwide influence, a stop smoking program, the 5-day plan, you remember that? There, I did that for 25 years, 4 times a year in my community. It was a program designed that the power of God would be the power that helped them overcome. Now, we didn't come out and say, well, that directly to them, but that was the way it was organized. And so it went around the world with our medical institution. It was a great thing. And the vegetarian diet being superior, Dr. Harding, Dr. Register, many of you probably remember at camp meetings hearing them present. And so around the world, this lifestyle was promoted. But this was during a time that medical science was still saying, you people are all wrong. You're all wrong. And this hospital was given to the church down in Florida to be operated. I had a nephew that was the chief operating officer of that hospital for a while. And the Sir Run Shaw Hospital in China, it was built by a wealthy Chinese man in Hong Kong, and then the Adventists were asked to come over and run it and establish that I helped give some talks in that hospital at one time. So I'm just showing you some of the worldwide movement of the information that God gave us as a church, the health information. We need to stay with it. We need to not be deviating into the counterfeit. This is the picture of Loma Linda today. The new hospital, $1.5 billion is completed now. You see there's high rise in the pack. So the Heart Transplant Center, remember the stories about that? And they're having a birthday of the recipients, Dr. Harding, Dr. Register. He was a dietitian, a doctorate of nutrition. and Dr. McFarland, the Stop Smoking program. Today, they have every 5 years a convention of worldwide vegetarianism. And I'm showing a picture where it was last in 2018 I attended. 34 nations were represented, the researchers in nutrition from 34 nations. That came together. And here we have a picture in a moment there, this institution, the meeting hall. And this is something from around the world. When they first started it, every 5 years, it was kind of mocked and made fun of. And now it's a highly established institution and is recognized of high science. The best researchers of the world in nutrition are brought in to help contribute to the program. It lasts usually about 3 days. And COVID came along and sort of got in the way of this next session. And so the final simple message for nutrition is the following: grains, fruits, nuts, and vegetables constitute the diet chosen for us by our Creator. Fruits, grains, and vegetables prepared in a simple way, free from spice and grease of all kinds, make with milk or cream the most healthful diet. A very simple thing, but it's taken science a long time to come around to that. But now they say, how did you know? How did you know? I've had that question asked me by physicians. Now, I'm going to give you a real brief, short visit with my tour in Phuket, Thailand, as a physician in a mission hospital. This is on an island in Thailand. Now it's a world-known retreat and resort area. At that time when I was there, it was old Thai. It was not a world-renowned retreat. Then the clinic was 3 miles from the hospital. It was down in the middle of town. In the waiting room to that door would be a big well. And if the children came in with fever, the mother would stand them up, get the bucket out of the well full of water and douse the kid and cool them off as they're waiting for us doctors to see them. So it was a rather interesting place. And that was a day when I had hair and some black hair. And one Sabbath morning in church, I got a call. I needed to do a cesarean section. So I took my 12-year-old boy and we went to the hospital. The anesthesiologist was not there that day. It was on vacation, so I had to do the anesthesia. I did a spinal anesthetic and then the surgery. And so my son, I gave him the camera and he took the pictures. He was 12 years old. And as I was doing the spinal tap, it was all covered over in the back and putting the needle in, he fainted. First time he'd been in an operating room. But I got my camera in time. It didn't break. So there. And then he got up and he took the following pictures. A little unsteady, so they're blurry. But we're opening the abdomen. And we're bringing the baby out. And now we're sucking out the baby. Got him upside down and sucking out the juice out of his mouth. And baby was soon crying. Here's a patient that had to remove a leg, had gangrene of the lower leg. And here's a child. This was not an uncommon thing, this type of problem in the Orient. And the next day after the surgery, there's a little scab there, but looks better. All right. So looking at that chart as we finish up, the columns on the far left is how long the Russians lived. I did a lot of teaching of this in Russia. And the men would live to about 57, 58 years of age, the women to about 71 on the average. And then the different countries, Romania, Germany, California, and so forth. And at the far end would be the vegetarian Adventist. And if you add it up, the vegetarian Adventist will live about a third longer than the Russian. And when I would show this in Russia and in the Ukraine, I said, now, you young people, you've listened and you change your ways and follow what we're going to be teaching you. You can be on the column on the far right versus the far left on that part. And so this story of the health message being given to a body for their benefit, for their eternal value, is So important. And to God be the glory. Thank you on there. And we'll wait a moment or two, and I have another one that I will take, probably just a part of the other one, but it's a very important part to have in preparation for tomorrow. So we'll have them change it back there and give me it's entitled Two Deceptions, Two Great Deceptions, the deception at the beginning of time and the deception at the end of time. Today and tomorrow morning, we're looking at the foundation before we get in and exposing particular therapies. Most important, to just go to those, we wind up with arguments. But going through what we've been going, I've found we don't have any arguments. If people stay and listen, they understand. So important. But having this foundation is, to me, the most important of all. Confidence that God gave us through his messenger, truth that is so valuable. And especially if it changes so we can understand spiritual things and we choose life eternal. It means we just now are giving a down payment on eternal life. I like to think of that. And so, David, are you there where you can give me the next session? Okay. Yeah, I have some right here. It's been 2 years since I've done this, and I've figured I'll come here and I'll find out if I can still do it. Not doing too well. I've been doing it for 25 years, but I got older. In spite of following the health message. All right, there we go. Thank you, David, Pastor David. Can you read that?
I am the way.
The truth and the life. Yeah, I got that off of a calendar. So nice. You shall have no other God before me. You know where that came from? All right. Please read.
Behold, I set before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you today, and the curse, if you do not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn aside from the way which I command you today to go after other gods which you have not known.
All right. Very well. And we have from Deuteronomy 12, verses 2 and 3.
You shall utterly destroy all the places where the nations which you shall dispossess served their gods on the high mountains and on the hills and under every green tree. And you shall destroy their altars, break their sacred pillars, and burn their wooden images with fire. You shall cut down the carved images of their gods and destroy their names from that place.
They were to destroy even the names of the place. How much God was against that. Not only destroy all of the relics, and that which, but the very name. Yeah. All right, that one too. This is the introduction to this great deception at the beginning of time. Go ahead.
When you come into the land which the Lord our God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, or one who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead.
All right. So that's as they were going into the land of New Canaan, they're going to cross the Jordan, and before they go in, God gives this instructions. Moses is recording this, what God has told him. You're not to do any of that witchcraft. And we're told by the God's messenger that the same witchcraft of old is present today under different names. It's the same spirit, same deception. And they were loaded with it, and that they were being wiped out, cleaned out, because they've been doing that. Might that tell us that it's rather important in God's sight? I think so. Please read.
For all who do these things are an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord your God drives them out before you. Ye shall be blameless before the Lord your God. For these nations which you will dispossess listened to soothsayers and diviners. Thank you. But as for you, the Lord your God has not appointed such for you.
All right, this is pretty strong directions. 1848, the first health message, to be the right arm of our message. It had value to attract people. It is to be a part of the third angel's message. It is in harmony with God's physical laws. And it was rejected by science until the late. When I started practice medicine, doctors say, well, you're trying to give me your religion, when I would try to direct them in health education and in dietary things. At my latter part of my practice would be in the 1990s. They said, this is why I came here, because of your understanding. What a change. We went from being ridiculed by medical science to saying, how did you know that? Because God was the truth. So it is, and this method that God has given, it's in harmony with the physical laws that's known by science today, and is proved to be the best healthcare guide in the world. Adventists have been recognized, the book, The Blue Zone. You've heard, everybody's heard of the book, The Blue Zone, that shows that longest lived people in the world. Those people from those different countries that were long lived, they all grew up in a similar type of lifestyle from childhood on. The Adventist studies was taking people that had joined the church at various times, that lived in different ways, and still was right up to near the top. And so you can see the value when you took those that had lived all their life, the health life, they were beyond, several years beyond in lifestyle. All right, the alternative of mystical healing, not in harmony with God's physical laws. So these alternative, the acupuncture, the yoga, the iridology, the reflexology, they have nothing to do with the physical laws. They're not, the science has studied them, can't find any relationship to the physiology that we know about. And their origin is out of a pagan pantheistic dogma. We'll show that tomorrow, what I'm really saying here. And it's being used as the right arm for evangelism of the Eastern worldview, the Eastern religions. It is just like we use it as a right arm to attract people's interest to our message. It's being used as a right arm for the pagan religions, the neo-pagan movement that we have throughout our world. And it has been very effective for deceiving and moving into our church. I have a friend that does a lot of lecturing on this, and he has quizzed his audience, and he has large audiences. And he tells me 35 to 40% of his audiences, Adventist audiences, admit to being accepting and using at some time these various methods that we're going to expose. It's that big. And my understanding is it'll cost me, if I get involved in it, it'll cost me my eternal life. I believe that fully. We're told unequivocally that even to give the least countenance to them, that we will go with the crowd when the testing time comes. We'll have that out probably tomorrow. We'll see that written out. All right. Not a few in the Christian age and Christian nation resort to evil spirits rather than trust in the power of the living God. The mother, watching by the sick bed of her child, exclaims, I can do no more. Is there no physician who has power to restore my child? She is told of a wonderful cure performed by some We're going to continue here if I get this to move. All right. Clairvoyant or magnetic healer, and she trusts her dear one to his charge, placing it as verily in the hands of Satan as if he were standing by her side. In many instances, the future life of the child is controlled by a satanic power, which it seems impossible to break. That's rather serious, isn't it? Mighty serious. And to think that how much that happens, that's unbelievable. Two great spiritualistic deceptions. And the part that I want to come to is here. Let's go down to the Garden of Eden. And you know the story, you've read it scores of times. And God saw that it was very good. What's this? When he created each day, he saw it was good. He saw it was good. And eventually he saw it was very good. And I reading that one day, says, what does it mean by putting the word good here? It must be more than I can understand. And so I looked into a dictionary, and one of the definitions of good is to be in harmony with the moral order of the universe. God is saying when he created, it was good. It fit into the harmony of all of his worlds in the universe. Harmony of peace and happiness and obedience to God. So that was, he created another creation to fall into that. But then you know the story that happened after that. But first, the law of love, God is love. God the Father gives to the Son, who in turn gives to the created beings, who in turn gives back the love to God the Son, who returns it to the Father. It's called the law of the universe, the great circumference, the great circle of love that was the good, the harmony of the universe. But this beautiful being on the left turned to the being on the right and instituted a change. He deceived people in heaven, the angels in heaven, to give him homage, and on earth he does everything possible to deceive people, thinking they're giving homage to the Creator God, but in turn it's being given to him. And he works in many ways. You're all aware of that. This simply is bringing it out to consider. Now we come to the garden. There was a tree. There are two trees right in the middle. One is the tree of life, that if you partake of it, even a sinner partaking of it would continue to live. So we have the tree of life, and then the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Two systems. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil isn't just, well, now we know about evil. It's a taking together good and evil together and making a system of it. So it's a knowledge of a system using a blend together, a mixture. This makes it a little different in our understanding, and this is the foundation of the devil's deceptions. Right here, we're going in the garden, we're learning the modus operandi of the devil down through time. Deception is number one, and to mix. Would you read the top one there on the bottom?
Ventured on Satan's ground.
So Eve moved where she was told not to go. All right, read the next.
Serpent used as a medium.
She didn't recognize that this serpent was really that angel she was told about that had fell from heaven. Go ahead.
Eve parlayed with
a little bit of stick around and see what goes on. Go ahead.
Mixed error with truth.
And the great power of the devil is mixing a little bit of error with a lot of good truth. First chapter of the Patriarchs and Prophets points this out. That's where he gets his power. And that's what happens in much of the alternative therapies. There'd be some truth maybe there, but they mix the error. And so we have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Let's look a little further at that. We had the serpent in the tree, and he asked Eve, what did God say? And you know the answer there, that I will die if I partake. And he says, you won't. So we have that lie. Then the lie down below, he says, if you partake of this fruit, you will be wise, you will become like a god. Now, through life, I learned that there's a tree of knowledge of good and evil. So, yep, there is truth, and then there was evil. So we have the two, the good and the evil, separated in my mind. I knew that if you don't die, you could supposedly connect with the dead. And that was basically the one that made sense out of those three. But we intended to ignore the teachings that you become a God. And that actually is the power today being taught, that you have mixed error with good and gives you the power. So you have mixed evil together, and as a system. We have God's system of good harmony, and now we have a system of mixing up the good with the evil, a whole different system. We have the mystery of righteousness and the mystery of iniquity. Think of this. This is a new way of thinking about this garden episode. And I get this from the book To Be One by Ernest Steed. I did not come up with this understanding. A wonderful understanding that Ernest Steed in his book To Be One brings out. He was the father of Lincoln Steed. He was General Conference temperance leader for 25 years. And he opened this. I'm going to tell a story tomorrow, and I didn't tell it tonight because I would repeat it again, of how I got into this teaching. And his book was a big part of this. And so we have this, you shall become wise like a God. The teachings through paganism is that you have God through you. We read the comment that Dr. Kellogg says you have this piece of Christ, this divinity, piece of his divinity within you. The same teaching, except they don't attach a living God to it. And so we have the three things, that you have the knowledge of good and evil, this as a system, a new system versus God's system, that you don't die, you have an immortal soul, you become a God. And that's the teaching that's all around us today, and it's the foundation of the alternative therapies. We'll show you how that is as we go along in time. All right, and here's a better way of showing. Good, or God plus Lucifer, would be superior. That's the devil said. I can tweak he says God's law is not quite right. And I can tweak it a little bit and we'll make it superior. That's the teaching. Read Patriarchs and Prophets, the first paragraph, first chapter. And which would be, good would be actually the love of God. It's a synonym for the love of God. Every act of creation was an act of love, we're told. So, and that is selflessness. If we want to come down to the real brass tacks, selflessness versus selfishness. This is what we're looking at. And that is such an important understanding to gain there. At the cross of Calvary, love and selfishness stood face to face. That finalizes my comment. Selflessness versus selfishness at the cross. The love of God, the death of Christ, giving his life, one of the Godhead. And he died the second death. That's what's so important. He did not at that moment see on through. He forever was separating from the God the Father. That's what the price he paid for us. Yes. Fruit from the tree in the garden was the first modality offered, kind of a supplement, you might say, offered by Satan to bring about the full potential of man, his divinity. Yes. Okay, you read that. It's a little hard for me.
Paganism is a counterfeit of God's plan of salvation. Creation, a blending of a two-part cosmic force, God to oneness, and creation formed in duality.
Now that's the theology of Satan. Go ahead.
Life's pursuit to attain non-dual state, oneness/godhood/immortality. Many physical and mental acts designed to bring about the non-dual state.
Tomorrow we'll make that more clear what we're talking about on that part, but it's talking, the devil goes back at creation and he gives us a false story of creation. And from that he builds on and brings about, and we'll show how his healing, so-called healing methods arise out of this whole concept. They have not been shown to be in harmony with the medical science or with the physics and chemistry of that we know. They are power by spirit power. Because they do some things. Do not be deceived. He says, take heed that no man deceives you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And many false prophets shall rise and shall deceive many. This is Matthew 24. Then if any man shall say unto you, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. You're very familiar with that part. In 1 Timothy 4:1, now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. Oh, Revelation 16, and I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, out of the mouth of the false prophet. What are they? For they are spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and to the whole world to gather them to the battle of the great day of God Almighty. Tomorrow I hope to be able to show you how this movement, the alternative healing method, is one of the methods that the devil is using to bring our minds to the Eastern style of thinking, to help bring together an ecumenical movement, God within. And so we're actually in destroying our own teachings if we gain and use them. And this is very powerful. We'll show that more in detail tomorrow, but just to give you a glimpse what we're headed for. Spirits working miracles. Well, they're in all types of environmental things, comics, games, so forth. The book, The Aquarian Conspiracy, is sort of considered the Bible for the New Age movement. The New Age now is called progressives and also the New Spirituality. They have expanded. They haven't gone away. They're populating the earth there. The Aquarian Conspiracy predicted, written in 1980, tells us exactly what they're out there to do. They're to try to bring together people that would, of the West, to have the Eastern worldview, that there is divinity within, and bring the whole world together under that concept, so that the people of the West, instead of looking upward to God, will look inward to the power coming from self. That's the whole key here. And so this book brings that out, and it says the best method for doing that are these alternative therapies. It's a fantastic book, but it's not what we wanted to happen. They even tell us in this book, the lady that wrote it, that California will be the leading state to bring this to the nation. And it's turning true. It's 45 years old. And that's simply an illustration that another instructor, again, he let me borrow it. It says, showing that these variety of influences, and there was a whole host of them, from comics, things on television, and so forth, and the book says there are 10,000 entry points that the devil uses to change our viewpoint. Okay, false revival. Paul, you read it, please. That's hard for me.
False revival. Paul, in his second letter to the Thessalonians, points to the special working of Satan and spiritualism as an event to take place immediately before the second advent of Christ. Speaking of Christ's second coming, he declares that it is after the working of Satan with all power and lying wonders.
Now we're right in the midst of it. Read.
Spirits like frogs. They are the spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth into the kings of the earth and of the whole world, to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. Revelation 16, verses 13 and 14. Except those who are kept by the power of God through faith in his word, the whole world will be swept into the ranks of this delusion. People are fast being lulled to a fatal security, to be awakened only by the outpouring of the wrath of God.
Oh, yes. Read, please.
As spiritualism more closely imitates the nominal Christianity of the day, it has greater power to deceive and ensnare. Through the agency of spiritualism, miracles will be wrought, the sick will be healed, and many undeniable wonders will be performed. And as the spirits will profess faith in the Bible and manifest respect for the institutions of the church, their work will be accepted as a manifestation of divine power.
All right. Are you beginning to see how the devil has been using these therapies that are not based on science? Things may happen, but it can be the power. There's a power behind it oftentimes. But whose power? That's the question. Yes. All right. The last day events, the last great delusion is soon to open before us. Antichrist is to perform his marvelous work in our sight. So closely will the counterfeit resemble the true that it will be impossible to distinguish between them except by the Holy Spirit. Every testimony, every statement, and every miracle must be tested by Scripture. The sciences of phrenology, psychology, and mesmerism, that's hypnotism, had been a channel through which Satan has worked in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Today, the same power is present, but under many different forms and practices. Message to young people, 572. Phrenology, they feel on your head bumps and tell blood pressure, and you're going to treat your mental disease or whatever. And so they put this big crown on you that puts pressure at certain points to give you therapy. That was in the early 1900s, rather popular. And she says this leads to spiritualism to get involved in that. And what was the trouble with psychology? Well, psychology is built in self. Remember the tree? You have good and you have evil. Evil is self. And self-esteem. I put the word self-esteem on the E.G. White ROM, and it came up 53 times, and not one of them was saying anything good about it. All of them were, of the comments about self-esteem was not to be a part of our thinking. That's saying I'm good. Self-value, that God died for me, is different. But that I have goodness within, that's what self-esteem is in there. So that's being taught. Psychoanalysis, collective consciousness, human potential, the godhood, by Dr. Freud and Carl Jung. They were deep spiritualists. Almost all psychiatrists at the turn of the century were deep into spiritualism. And the mesmerism or the hypnosis, we'll just go through these. Read that for us, please.
My message to you is no longer consent to listen without protest to the perversion of truth, God's word, John chapter 17, verse 17. Unmask the pretentious sophistries, which, if received, will lead ministers and physicians and medical missionary workers to ignore the truth. God calls upon men and women to take their stand under the bloodstained banner of Prince Emmanuel. I have been instructed to warn our people, for many are in danger of receiving theories and sophistries that undermine the foundation pillars of the faith. I call upon those who have been connected with these binding influences to break the yoke to which they have long submitted and stand as free men in Christ. Nothing but a determined effort will break the spell that is upon them. Be not deceived, many will depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. We have now before us the Alpha of this danger. The Omega will be of a most startling nature.
All right, thank you. And we're getting near the end here.
1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1. We have reached the perils of the last days. Some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. Be cautious in regard to what you read and how you hear. Take not a particle of interest in spiritualistic theories. Satan is waiting to steal a march upon everyone who allows himself to be deceived by his hypnotism. He begins to exert his power over them just as soon as attention is given to his theories.
As soon as we begin to investigate for our use some of those, it tells us his power is over us. That's not taking very long, is it? And so as I read and study these, it impresses me that we're dealing with a very, very important subject to understand and to avoid. Except those who are kept by the power of God through faith in his word, the whole world will be swept into the ranks of this delusion. We're talking about a pretty powerful movement. Thank you so much. I am the Alpha and the Omega, is the comment. Thank you.
Amen.
And Pastor?